Joining me for all the chat today, I am delighted to say, is former Labour Party advisor Matthew Laza. Always great to see you, Matthew.
Good morning, lovely to be with you.
He has just before you get worried, everybody, he has remarkably sane views for someone in the Labour Party. Was that
I
a
know. Well,
thing to
thank
say?
you. I mean, no, don't get me cancelled by the comrades. But yes,
well, there is that. I mean, you know,
I like to think of myself as
better
a
be
reasonable
careful.
chap.
Better be careful. Mind those comrades. So much to talk about. Now, I've got two questions for you guys today. I'll put the questions out right now before we speak, because you've got your own mind. I'm sure you've got your own views before we give ours. But the government's climate advisor is saying Brits will have to install heat pumps, buy electric cars, give up foreign holidays, eat less meat, all of that to hit net zero targets, which, by the way, won't achieve anything whatsoever. I want to know what your reaction is to that. Usual rules, keep it clean, or I can't actually put them on air. Give us a call on 0344 499 1000, text on 87222. Get in touch on X at TalkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. You can leave a message on our YouTube page, and that is free as well. But also, about first topic today, I want to ask your thoughts about Keir Starmer cutting the foreign aid budget to boost defence spending. I want to know, was it the right decision? And tell us why it was. Tell us why it wasn't. Maybe you think that shouldn't cut foreign aid spending. Maybe you think that actually you should cut all of foreign aid spending and boost defence spending by more. Either way, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do get in touch. As I said, the number to call 0344 499 1000. Matthew Laza, let's put some of those questions to you. Big announcement on the defence spending rise yesterday. I think a lot of people really, quite surprised that this has come so soon. But Starmer saying that he was going to go from 0.3% of our national spending, our national budget, effectively, to 0.5%. That would mean an extra £13.4 billion extra a year by 2027. That figure doesn't really quite add up, because actually it would have gone up anyway in real terms and with inflation. So actually we've got £7.9 billion sort of shortfall. The extra sum is actually around the £6 billion mark. Here's the other thing though. Cutting the aid budget from 0.5% of GDP to 0.3%, that basically saves £6 billion. But a lot of that spending is on things like defence pensions. A lot of that spending is on things like our intelligence work rather than actual defences. There's also refusal from number 10 when asked repeatedly, does any of that defence spending include giving Mauritius £18 billion over 100 years, but front-loaded with far more money coming earlier than later, for in return for giving away the Chagos Islands? They won't say. It's an easy answer, isn't it? No is the answer. If it wasn't no, we have to assume the answer is yes. So is that extra spending on defence actually just smoke and mirrors even, or is it real?
So I think it's real. I think that the Prime Minister could have been a wee bit clearer in his language by saying it's a total, more will be spent on defence, which is the 12 billion or the higher figure, and the extra money announced yesterday is kind of about 6 billion per year. I think it's very important that that money doesn't get lost either on things like the Chagos deal. I suspect that the Chagos deal will, post the visit to Washington, be pushed further off the table. It
should be dumped
into
completely.
the bin. Absolutely. So I think that in the end we won't have to worry about the Chagos deal coming out of it.
You think that?
I think that the government would like to go with it. Yeah, and I think using Trump as your reason.
Won't that look really bad to the comrades? I mean, to all your human rights lawyer friends at all your dinner parties in North London, giving in to the orange man in Washington. That's as opposed to some sort of highfalutin principle. That's not going to look good to the comrades.
No, look, I mean, I think they're going to be so. Some of the comrades, and of course, these aren't just people in the Labour Party, but kind of what you might call left liberal opinion, will be kind of outraged by the cut to the aid budget anyway. That I think the Chagos Islands will be the least of their worries in terms of their outrage. But there is going to be some pushback from left liberal opinion. And I think it's a test for Keir that he stands firm on what.
Well, it was interesting that this was kept so quiet, and we understand cabinet ministers were already told individually, not together. I'm wondering whether they've even bothered telling David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary. Who knows? Bearing in mind that he's been very clear that cutting the aid budget when the last Conservative government, when they took it down from 0.7% of GDP to 0.5%, they said this was catastrophic and was terrible and undermined Britain's position in the world and the like. By the way, that 0.7% of GDP, which ended up being, 12 billion quid a year? I mean, literally plucked from nowhere. It was genuinely, it was written on the back of a piece of loo roll. I mean, it was absolutely...
I think it's a campaign target.
It was a campaign target. It was there is no rhyme or reason behind it other than, you can probably get away with that. It's not 1%, it's below, but it's enough, huge sums of money. And it did mean that even when we went through the austerity that we did under Cameron and Osborne, that aid budget was not cut. And so more and more money was being spent on people abroad. And we know, the same with USAID, that budget which Elon Musk is now cutting. An awful lot of this stuff. And there's stuff that's really good. Anything that is about clean water, education for girls, contraception, all in favour. The rest of it, the whatever, the Romanian Spice Girls or paying for... giving money to India when they've got a nuclear programme, or give money to China, for God's sake. I mean, they're a hostile enemy state that are much richer than us. This is absurd. An awful lot of this money is completely and utterly taken by, corrupt kleptocratic leaders. It doesn't do any good. It's just sort of paying for an awful lot of, Cassandras and Tobiases to have a lovely gap year job. It's a load of nonsense. I'm all in favour of getting rid of a load of this stuff, personally. But it's not gone down well with the likes of, David Miliband, former Labour Foreign Secretary. Everyone says, the king across the sea, living in his New York penthouse, of course, on a $1.3 million salary, as the CEO of a charity. Apparently perfectly normal in America, the International Rescue Committee. He said yesterday that the move to cut foreign aid was a blow to Britain's proud reputation as a global humanitarian and development leader. Is it?
Well, I think if we cut our aid completely, the Americans might and have certainly paused it completely in the meantime, would be a mistake, because I think, as you say, there are some really valuable things that we do for some of the most vulnerable.
But we should only be doing those valuable things.
Absolutely. I don't think we need to be paying for the Indian space programme and for some of the more outre line items in that expenditure. So I hope that, because it's going to be shrinking, I hope that we look at the effectiveness of it and we really target it where it's most needed.
When it comes to the defence spending, we know that this has been welcomed by the Trump administration, and when Keir Starmer sits down with Donald Trump in the Oval Office tomorrow, hopefully sort of not on his knee, sort of like he was like sort of bring your son to work day with Emmanuel Macron sitting next to the desk of Donald Trump when he made a statement yesterday, earlier in the week. Obviously, he's trying to curry favour with Donald Trump, but not just for Britain, but also for the defence of Ukraine. And it is, I think, very good to see the European nations working together properly to try and make sure that they can defend Ukraine. But Donald Trump, he's called it right. He called it right in his first term of office. The Europeans do not pay enough for their own security. It's not America's job to do our security for us. They've got the rest of the world to worry about and their own defences. 68% of the NATO budget is spent by America alone. I mean, come on, we've not been pulling our weight. It's quite right that the European nations that are perfectly wealthy do pull their weight and spend more on defence. But do you think that what the European nations are going to do you think they will be able to convince Donald Trump and his aides to give a better deal to Ukraine? Because we've got this US-Ukraine mineral deal, we understand. Now, there had been a demand for $500 billion, wasn't it? $500 billion worth of Ukrainian mineral rights. Get it right? Can't speak today. Mineral rights to be given to the Americans in return for all their funding. I think it's $170 billion worth of funding to the Ukraine war. Though it was given as grants, not as loans, we understood. But we understand it doesn't contain a security sort of guarantee from the United States. What is the point of Ukraine giving up mineral rights if they're not going to get any security guarantee from the US?
Well, I think it's far from a perfect deal, but I think it's the best deal that they were likely to get out of this.
Well, why give away anything? If the US are going to give up helping you, why bother giving them the mineral rights when you're going to need those to rebuild your nation? Yeah, absolutely.
I think what they're doing is there's more of a sharing of the rights rather than a sort of takeover from the US. So, effectively, the Americans have got the Ukrainians by the you-know-what, because if the Americans stop the arms shipments,
but he said he's going to anyway.
Yeah, well, I think that they're hoping that signing the deal will mean that he doesn't. I mean, as we've seen with Trump, it's the art of the deal. To go back to his book, he likes to push people right to the edge and then pulls back once they've given some ground. So hopefully this is enough ground to see, at least whilst the peace talks continue, that the arms keep flowing, because otherwise Ukraine's going to run out of them very soon.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, it'd be nice to involve Zelensky in the peace talks, wouldn't it? I have to say, I think Donald Trump and America are completely and utterly, abjectly wrong on this. I've said this all along, but we shall see what happens there. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because one of the fascinating things is about the Trump saying, Russia's not the aggressor. Russia, poor little Putin, is big mate. He's done nothing wrong. It was Ukraine's fault that there was this war. And yet, at the same time, saying, Europe, you need to arm yourselves. You need to be spending more because you need to deal with your own security. Well, where's the threat coming from? Was it Iceland? Are Iceland going to invade us? Who are we worried about? I don't know about who. I'm not worried about Finland. I'm not worried about, Cyprus invading Britain or invading the rest of... Oh, is it Russia? Right. So it literally seems to hold these two things in his head at the same time, these two ideas. So Russia is not the aggressor. They've done nothing wrong. They're just defending themselves. And at the same time, Europe, you need to double your spending, because he's asked for 5% of GDP instead of 2.5%. You need to double your spending because you need to deal with the aggressor in Europe rather than us. Well, which is it? Is Russia an aggressor or is it not? Absolutely.
Why do you need to put up your spending if there isn't an aggressor? And in fact, of course, when we were friendly with Russia in the kind of noughties, that's when the spending started to go down across the continent, and even to a certain extent in America from its Cold War highs. Yep. So if you don't have an enemy, you don't spend on defence. So it's daft. And whatever people think of Donald shaking things up in other ways, I agree with you. He's just completely wrong on this.
Are you surprised that Keir Starmer has stepped up like this, or is it again some smoke and mirrors about the actual amount of money? Because again, to me, it's not about the money. It's what do we need? What do we need to defend ourselves and to defend, Western Europe and Eastern Europe from Vladimir Putin? What do we need? Well, whatever we need to spend that amount of money on it, because our way of life, a little bit extra for schools or for more NHS, that's meaningless if we can't defend, Western democracy.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I'm pleased. I think they were going to get there before too long, but I'm glad that in a way that they've accelerated it. What I would say is that don't underestimate how much of a big decision this is for Keir Starmer, because Labour's instincts are to spend more on foreign aid. When I worked for Ed Miliband, we did a big foreign aid event at the 2015 election. Not sure that won us many votes in the Red Wall. No. It was in Islington as well. And so the heart and soul of the Labour Party loves a bit of international aid. And therefore to cut it is a really tough decision for a Labour Prime Minister.
Absolutely. Well, look, our next topic is very much linked. It's very much linked. Did you think net zero completely different? No. Pushing net zero policies completely undermines our ability to defend ourselves. It makes us poorer. You can't afford massive defence spending to protect your country and your allies if you're a poorer country, which we are. We haven't got any growth. But also, crucially, if you make our energy more unreliable and more insecure and more expensive, you can't afford to manufacture defence equipment, which we can't. We can barely make our own steel. We can barely make concrete anymore. Our energy costs are 4 times that in the industrial complex than America, and way more than they are in China because of net zero policies. Latest offering from the Climate Change Committee, not an elected accountable body, not MPs. No, these are just completely appointees of the great and the good, with classics degrees and the like, who've done nothing of any use for anybody ever. But these people have been appointed to this committee, bizarrely, to advise the government and instruct the government on their net zero policies. And they have basically said, millions of Brits are going to have to install heat pumps. We're going to need 1.5 million heat pumps installations a year in existing homes, not just in new homes, as is going to be a legal requirement. Also wrong. But heat pumps, by the way, which cost like twice as much to install, don't actually heat properly. I know, small point worth making. That's by 2035. 1.5 million heat pumps installed a year. They basically say that most of us are going to have to drive EV cars, so 3/4 of cars and vans, 2/3 of heavy good vehicles would need to be electric by 2040. We will have to eat 1/4 less meat and dairy products, and basically flying abroad, well, not really going to be an option. Maybe 1 flight a year if you're lucky. I mean, I can't think of more things that would massively impact my life than this. I love my central heating. Genuinely, I've said before, you can take my gas boiler thermostat out of my cold, dead hands because I will arm myself. No one is coming in my building and stopping me from having my gas boiler. Simple, end of. Don't want to drive an electric car. Cost too much, not reliable. They're also far less green than actually my diesel. Not going to be told by anyone what I can and cannot eat. I'm also not going to be told by anyone when I can and cannot fly abroad. How do you think this is going to go down with ordinary voters, particularly those voters in the red wall who are already deserting your party en masse?
So I think you're right that this has come from a committee of unelected people, members of the great and the good, and so therefore I think it's up to the politicians to say, come on, chaps and chapesses, let's have a bit of common sense here.
Oh no, just abolish the committee. No one should be directing major aspects of our lives and our economic policy who isn't elected and accountable.
Well, I think it's just recommendations. They're not necessarily going to be translated into policy.
Who are they to make recommendations? I may as well ask, McLeaner. May as well ask the bloke who drove my tube train this morning. They've got just as many qualifications.
So, actually, that's where, I think that's a very good point because you need to bring people with you on climate change. And actually, maybe what we need to...
Well, you can't. You can't if they know the facts.
So in terms of whether these are enacted, of course, the answer is the government needs to reject most of these. Look,
well, what's the point of having advisors if you don't listen to them because what they say is complete abject nonsense?
Well, I actually want to know what the point of the Climate Change Committee is and why these decisions aren't being taken by ministers. We'll maybe come on to talk about the NHS, and one of the things is ministers are trying to take back control of the NHS by getting their hands on the levers of power so they can actually make decisions and cutting out some of the bureaucrats.
The likes of the NHS Chief Amanda Pritchard.
Absolutely. So actually the Climate Change Committee, which isn't a Labour invention, it's been there forever.
I blame the Tories just as much.
Absolutely.
It's the reason why they're out of power.
Maybe we should...
It's the reason why... It is, I think, the reason why they will not be back in power next time round.
Yeah, so I think maybe it's time to look at the future of the Climate Change Committee. Maybe saving its meetings would save some emissions.
Yeah,
Hot air, certainly.
Absolutely.